Hi everyone, welcome. This is Sonia Kelly from the Center for Financial Inclusion. We're about to get started, but in the meantime, we're putting up a poll on the screen to better understand who's joining us today. So you'll see that coming up in just a minute. So here we go. Which of these categories best describes you? Are you a donor, investor, or multilateral? Are you a financial services provider or support organization? Are you in the academic community or part of a think tank? Are you in the government or part of the public sector or something else? Let us know who you are and where you're coming from. And also, I should apologize at this point for just how limited these categories are. We only have in the software 5 different options for you. So I understand that donor, investor, and multilateral is a huge group to lump together. It looks like 70% of you have voted for this, so we'll keep it open for just a few more seconds as people take this poll. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll and see who's joining us today. It looks like the majority of people are from a financial services provider or financial services support organization. That's almost half of our listeners today. Second is donors, investors, and multilaterals at almost 20%, and then the academic think tank audience is 13%. Other is also 13%. So would love to know as we get to the question and comment part of our webinar who you are and where you're calling from and what your interest is in this topic as you ask questions. We're going to get started in just a minute with the actual fun stuff, the content, but first I'd like to go over a few housekeeping details. We've muted all of you for the sake of keeping background noise to a minimum during the presentation, but you can see in your control panel there is a place where you're able to raise your hand. If you raise your hand, we'll start a chat with you and ask you if you have a question, and we're happy to open the line to you to make sure that you can be heard by the rest of the webinar participants. You can also use the chat function to ask questions, and you can reach out to us if you're having issues with your technology, and we can try to troubleshoot from our end. I should also mention that we're recording the session and we will be sharing it on our website afterwards for those who wanted to participate but were unable to do so. So with that, let's get to the fun stuff. This webinar is on Modelo Peru. It comes on the anniversary of 1 year of Modelo Peru being in operation. I'd like to, before I turn to the author of the report, the co-author of the report, I'd like to thank the Institute of International Finance for their collaboration on this research with us. They were an integral partner as we jointly conducted interviews and tried to get to the bottom of what the primary successes and primary challenges are of this model in Peru as it moves forward. With that, I'll introduce Pablo Antón Díaz, our research manager at CFI. Pablo came to us last year having worked on the SMART campaign, worked at the Inter-American Development Bank, worked at the UN, and worked for IPA. So he has a rich history of research and brought that to bear on this project, which was actually his first as a research manager. So we'll turn to you, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be here and speak to you this morning about the report that we're doing, the report that we just launched for the Modelo Peru, which was, like as Sonia mentioned, a joint publication between us and the IIF. The report was co-authored between Tomás Conde from the IIF and myself, and it was based off like a broad a series of interviews that we conducted in Peru during the months of November and December. The people we interviewed, multiple stakeholders that are part of the Modelo Peru implementation with different financial institution, with different people from financial institutions as well as from Pagos Digitales Peruanos and regulators and such. And we are happy. I think that at this moment, we're also going to be sharing a copy of the report with you as a handout. But let's get started. So if we can flip the... Okay, great. So for the presentation roadmap, we're first going to talk about the study itself, the publication. What was the focus of our study, and why Modelo Peru is such a unique platform. And after that, we're going to be talking a little bit about what the outcomes of the model were, and digging a little bit further into the key implementation challenges as well as the potential solutions. The key implementation challenges that the platform has faced during its first year of operation, as well as a list of the potential solutions that have been developed by by various of the multiple stakeholders, and what does the road to success look like at this point for Modelo Peru. And then finally, we're going to leave a little bit of time for a discussion and a series of questions and answers. So let's get started. And then next slide, please.
We're just having trouble flipping the slide. Here we go.
Okay, first of all, why is Modelo Peru so unique, and why we consider it to be a success in itself? First of all, because Modelo Peru is the first, is the first fully interoperable platform, like digital payment platform, that has been developed in any country in the world that is at a sector level. So it's the first concrete proposal for a national digital payments platform in the world that can be fully interoperable. And why is interoperability something that is this important? It's because of the fact that if for any digital payment platform that needs to compete with cash, it is necessary for it to be ubiquitous. It is necessary for it to be widely accepted and broadly accepted by everybody, and that all of the different payers and payees that people want to make transactions with. And the main obstacle nowadays for digital payment systems worldwide has been precisely this, that in most cases, most digital payment platforms are owned by a single FI or a small consortium of FIs that partner with a mobile network operator, and these are systems that are therefore only accepted by direct account holder of this small group of financial institutions. So it's very hard for these. It has been very hard for these systems to become ubiquitous and fully accepted at a sector level. It is in one of our interviews a very interesting quote that we heard was that for all the cases where a solution that is proposed is actually worse than the problem, then this solution will not be adopted, and the situation will inevitably return to the status quo. And that's exactly what has happened in a lot of countries with these new innovative platforms for digital payments, that because they're not widely accepted, it has become a challenge for them to actually be taken on by new customers because of the hassle if the digital payment platform is not widely accepted, then people will inevitably revert back to cash to avoid the hassle. So that's why, in order to transcend these barriers and achieve critical mass, interoperability is definitely key. And that is why Modelo Peru is such an interesting platform to take a deeper dive into, because, like I already mentioned, it's the first platform that has proven to be effective enough to overcome this barrier. Next slide, please. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, Modelo Peru is the first of its kind. It was originally developed in 2013 by ASBank, which is the Peruvian Bankers Association. And it was developed by a joint decision between some of the largest commercial banks in Peru to actually create a platform that would allow them to expand their client base outside of the main urban centers and reach locations of the country where historically they had never ventured into because of different considerations and obstacles such as cost barriers and low profit margins. Okay, and so and so as I was saying, it was developed originally by ASBank, and then once this model was agreed to by ASBank and the implementation began, different regulators and government officials from MIDIs and other government departments started signing on into the platform and starting supporting the platform because of how because of the opportunities that this platform offered. So and as well other later on as the model progressed, other mobile network operators as well as microfinance institutions and cooperatives also joined the platform. And the idea was that this platform would allow for a real opportunity to actually push financial inclusion in the country. This was particularly, especially for regulators and government officials, this was particularly important because of the challenges that they have faced in the past for pushing for a larger financial inclusion in rural areas. Peru, as most of you I'm sure already know, has one of the most developed financial systems in the region. However, most of its financial inclusion indicators, performance indicators, are far below the other ones from the region. So government authorities and banking regulators consider any sort of projects that can help further push financial inclusion in the country as a priority for them, and that's why it was so important. Also, it is worth mentioning how easy the BEAM platform, the Modelo Peru, the name of the Modelo Peru platform, the commercial name of the Modelo Peru platform is BEAM, which is short for Billetera Móvil in Spanish. And it is also worth mentioning how easy the platform is in order to be used. It's basically using a USSD digital platform that was developed by Ericsson after a long bidding process that included proposals from, I think it was 22 different digital solutions providers that also included other well-versed providers such as Visa and Yellow Pepper. And this platform is a very similar platform to the one that Ericsson has also developed and implemented in other countries such as Uganda and Pakistan for MNOs working there. However, according to our conversations with the people from Ericsson, the level of tailoring that was required in order to make this same platform work for Modelo Peru was unprecedented, because they had to develop the capability of a long list of over 33 different financial providers to be able to have their own signatures inside the platform, be able to have their own accounting systems, reporting systems inside the platform, and also have a digital clearing system that would clear all of the different all of the different accounts between those financial providers at the end of every day. And so that's also something that the people from Ericsson are very proud about. And as I was mentioning, the platform is really easy and has a very fast access. Customers are not required to have a bank account, are not required to even have internet connection on their phone or even calling credit. The only thing they need to do is log into the USSD platform, provide their national ID number, 4-digit password, and then select from a long list which one of the 33 financial institutions they are going to pick to guard their funds. And that's pretty much everything. That's also something that they can do. They can either do on their phones, or they can also do it at any of the more than 8,500 points of sale that are available nationwide already. And the services that are currently available include P2P, peer-to-peer transfers, cell phone top-ups, and an additional small list of payments that include tax and tuitions, which we'll speak a little bit more about later. Next slide, please. Okay, and here's a brief timeline of the implementation of the Modelo Peru thus far. The regulatory ecosystem that is allowing Modelo Peru to actually operate in the country was created in October 2012 when a new law to regulate the emission of digital money was first discussed in Congress. This law was later enacted in January 2013. It was called the National Law for Electronic Money, and it's what created the legal figure for electronic money emissions. That is what allows all of the financial institutions in Peru that are part of Modelo Peru to actually be able to create digital money. Then after that, as I was mentioning, in August 2014, Ericsson was selected after a long RFP process, and it was elected by Asbank to start developing the new platform. The platform took over a year to be created and tailored. And a year later, in July 2015, these large number of institutions that were part of Asbank, 33 financial institutions, jointly created in joint ownership, the company of Pagos Digitales Peruanos, which is the company that is in charge of managing the BIM platform and the Modelo Peru platform. And finally, in February 2016, the BIM platform was officially launched. Next slide, please. Okay, for the implementation stages, basically Pagos, once the BIM platform was launched, Pagos Peruanos developed a two-stage implementation where the first stage was based around sort of like encouraging, but pretty much building mass around the platform and just encouraging the general public to enroll into the platform. For this purpose, a mass media campaign, which we'll show you a few images from, was created, was designed, developed, and then launched nationwide in a lot of different media channels. And after that, for the actual implementation and enrollment of the accounts, Pagos Digitales Peruanos pretty much leveraged the existing network of banking agents that 4 of the largest banks in the country had already developed. This was Scotiabank, Interbank, BBVA, Continental, and BCP. Together, they own a network of around 8,500 different corresponding banking agents scattered in different parts of the country. And they were happy to pretty much enroll and train all of these banking agents to so that in order to make them start accepting BIM transactions, and so that they could leverage this network for all of the initial cash-in and cash-out transactions. And even though the ultimate goal of having a digital national payments platform such as this is to be able to carry out as many transactions digitally, it is key for this first stage of the implementation. It was key for this first stage of the implementation and continues to be to have a very strong network that allows for cash-in and cash-out transactions. The first year target that was set up by Pagos Digitales Peruanos was being able to create 300,000 electronic wallets during this first year of operations. And I have to say that it was very positive to see that this target was almost reached. I believe the current number of electronic wallets available in the platform right now is around 270,000, which is pretty close to this very optimistic target for the first year. And one point that was definitely key for this first stage was the fact that all of the financial providers that are part of the BIM platform agreed in advance to avoid any sort of a commercial differentiation between the products that they were going to be offering through this platform. what that means is that basically that allowed all of the campaigning efforts and all of the communication efforts to be centered just around the Beam brand without differentiating any of the financial providers behind the Beam brand. And it also allowed Beam to be able to have one unified product that they were going to offer the Peruvian market, regardless of who was offering it behind the curtain. And for this first stage pretty much encompassed the first 6 or 7 months of the platform. The second stage, which was more focused around building an ecosystem, a payment ecosystem that would be able to allow Beam users to be able to transact directly using digital money, was something that PDP has been focusing a lot during the past months and continues to be focusing through a series of pilots that they have conducted in different parts of the country. But basically, the main point during this second stage of the implementation was focused around inviting non-financial providers to join Modelo Peru and start being able to accept electronic digital money from Beam for their transactions with Beam users. And some of the examples that I can cite here briefly are around retail suppliers and national universities and even government agencies that have allowed this. And the first that I want to talk about briefly is, for example, for the retail suppliers, PDP launched a pilot during the last trimester of last year, where they partner with Bacchus, Gloria, and Lindley in being able to test the idea of accepting digital payments from small mom and pop shops and pharmacies for their supplier distributors that worked with these small mom and pop shops in Lima. They performed this pilot with 500 different small shops in the city. As you all know, Gloria, for example, is the largest producer and distributor of dairy products in the country. Lindley is one of Coca-Cola's main distributors, and Bacchus is also a very large beverage company that handles some of the most popular beer brands in Peru, for example. So the fact that they were able to promote a pilot where they would be accepting digital payments from small shop owners would pretty much create an incentive for these small shop owners to actually use the funds that they had available in their electronic wallets, and also try to incentivize in turn their customers to use the Beam platform to top up their Beam accounts and start transacting with that money instead of just using it for peer-to-peer transfers, which was the case before. In terms of what the performance story was for this pilot, we still don't have the final results, but we are expecting them to be very positive. And then another of the partnerships that PDP has been trying to work for this section has been partnering with different with the Banco de la Nación, which is a federal-owned, a national public bank that also is charged with distributing some of the most important national conditional cash transfer and social development programs. These includes, for example, the program Juntos, which is the largest conditional cash transfer program in Peru for low-income beneficiaries, and then also the Pensión 65 program, which is the national pension system for the elderly. Because Banco de la Nación is now also a shareholder at Pagos Digitales Peruano in the same fashion that all of the other 33 private financial institutions are, through Banco de la Nación, also the Social Development Ministry, the MIDIS, is currently contemplating the idea of using Beam for distributing these national social programs to their beneficiaries. After a very lengthy study that was conducted also with the support of the Better Than Cash Alliance, it was identified that BEAM could be a really positive way, an effective way to create cost savings and make the distribution of these benefits easier for the government authorities behind them. And okay, and then the last point that that PDP is working on is establishing a data analytics capability based around all of the data that they're basically getting from the transactions being carried out in the BEAM platform. However, that is something that they haven't had the chance to fully develop yet, but we are very interested in learning how that goes. Next slide. No? Okay. Okay. Finally, this is an image from the mass media campaign that was developed and created with the help of international advertising firms and market study firms to sort of like promote the idea of how easy BEAM was, and also trying to tailor all of the communication around BEAM to suit pretty much the needs and the colloquial language of the populations in Peru that this platform was targeted towards. And next slide, please. And then this next slide is basically to show you how the USSD platform works. It's very, very simple. The only thing that users have to do is just log onto the USSD platform by dialing star 838 hashtag and selecting the option 3. This pretty much shows you the image on the top right corner shows you all of the different options that clients have when they log into the platform. They can either top up their cell phones, they can also send money to friends and family, or they can also withdraw money from their accounts, or they can cash in and deposit money into their accounts. In this case, this example is trying to exemplify what it would look like if you want to send money to somebody like your mom. So the first thing you do is dial option 3, and then after that, the only thing you need to do is dial the cell phone number of the person that you want to send money to. And then next slide, please. And then basically you just write down how much money you want to send, and each transaction that you send will cost you a total of 50 cents, 50 cents of Peruvian soles. Which is, if I'm not mistaken, is I don't actually know the conversion rate, but I know it's very low. And then finally, both the recipient and the sender of this transaction will, next slide please, will receive an SMS message confirming the transaction and explaining to the person that received the funds what the instructions for actually being able to use these funds. Next slide, please. Now we're going to start talking about what were the key implementation challenges and potential solutions after 1 year of operations. Now that I remember the exchange rate, the 50 cents in Peruvian soles is equivalent to more or less 15 cents of the dollar. And next slide, please. Okay, now we briefly want to take a look at what are the main key performance indicators from Modelo Perú after 1 year of operations. As you can see here, and these numbers are up to January 2017. We haven't updated them yet with the numbers for February, which should already be available. But you can see that after 1 year of operation, exactly 1 year of operation, because this platform was launched in February 2016, there's a current number of over 250,000 active users and a total account of over 300 electronic wallets. However, it is important to highlight that over 15% of these of the electronic wallets that are available in the system have not been activated by their users, which that basically means that the users went through the activation process, but because they never really selected a 4-digit passcode, these accounts are still dormant and cannot be used. In terms of the number of active agents that are available in the platform, that are currently transacting and operating using the Beam platform, there's a total of 8,711 agents that can either accept accept and help carry out cash in and cash out transactions. However, it is also worth mentioning that 5% of these 8,700 clients, which accounts to more or less 500 agents, are also dormant and pending activation. So, and that is something that PDP is working very hard to make sure that they activate those accounts and that these points of sales are also available and active. So as you can see from the perspective of the number of users that are already currently in the platform, the numbers are okay. The numbers are according to the targets that were set up, and that's where the performance is going well. Where the performance is not going very well, and where the Modelo Perú platform has been struggling to sort of like build a momentum and continue growing, is around the daily average of transactions. As you can see from the numbers that are described here below in the bottom part of the table, the currently less than 1% of these accounts are performing transactions every month, which means that it basically means that these mass media campaign that happened and all of the efforts that happened during the first year were successful in getting people to sign into the platform, but they haven't been successful in getting people to actually use the platform. And that also speaks to the small number of transactions and the small number of services that are currently available in the platform. That is something that as this platform continues to develop, hopefully will be solved. And also pretty much all of the efforts from all of the different stakeholders involved of Modelo Peru and of PDP and specifically are currently focused in trying to address this issue and increase the number of transactions. However, what we can say is that even though the different pilots that happened during the first year to try to increase the flow of transactions didn't really deliver on the expected targets that they were pushing, there's definitely some promising views, because apparently during this last month that happened, February, these transactions numbers got a lot better, and I will explain a little bit of why in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Now we're going to start talking about what were the four main challenges that this platform has faced in trying to build up a larger transactionality. The first one is related to the double work that the banking agents that are currently operating with the Beam platform have had to face just because of the way that the platform was set up. Because as I mentioned already, all of the agents that are currently operating with Beam were basically leveraged from the already existing banking agent networks that the large banks already had in place, which in practice means that these banking agents were already performing specific transactions for their bank customers through a POS system that was only available for transacting that was only available for carrying out POS transactions for a specific bank. So, for example, the agents that were working for BCP were only able to carry out transactions for BCP through the POS system, as well as the agents that were only working with Scotiabank were only able to transact operations for the specific bank clients. However, and what ended up happening is that the Beam system, PDP, basically delivered a new feature phone for each one of these banking agents and trained and pretty much commissioned the banking network, the banks to train these banking agents on how to use these cell phone and be able to carry out cash in and cash out operation using the cell phone instead of the POS system. In practice, what ended up happening was that because Beam purely only operates through mobile phones, the agents were now expected to operate two separate platforms simultaneously, and that also meant that they needed to have two accounting systems simultaneously, and that they needed to have also two working capitals uh, uh, invested simultaneously on both platforms. So agents had to first buy into Beam and buy digital money funds and deposit a certain amount on their own Beam accounts in order to be able to use those funds to make transactions with their store customers. However, the main challenge, the first main challenge here was that, first of all, many agents were not used to working with phone interfaces and therefore didn't find the system to be user-friendly at all. Also, because this was a phone that was provided to them by PDP specifically, and they weren't using it for any other personal purposes, the agents sometimes always also forgot to charge their phones. And so whenever a customer came into their stores and wanted to perform an operation for Beam, the phone wasn't ready to be used, and they had to charge it. It took it took a while to set up, so it wasn't readily available. And then finally, the two working capital issue was also something that caused a lot of problems because shopkeepers basically didn't want to have that working, that second separate working capital. And also it wasn't a very good use of the funds because the Beam platform was new. Not a lot of people were using it. And so if you're a shop owner and you have two electronic systems, the POS from the bank that you're working with, and then the Beam platform, and you see that not a lot of people are making Beam transactions, but they are making a lot of transactions with the bank POS system, then you're not going to invest on that second platform. And so another thing that happened is that another issue that was faced was that many banking agents didn't have funds in their Beam account in order to fulfill the requests from the store clients that were coming in and asking to transact with the Beam platform. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the second challenge was around the fact that banks historically have focused all of their operations and have focused in developing all of their banking agent networks around urban areas and bank populations. So the problem is here was that Beam tapped agent networks managed by commercial banks, primarily distributed around the main urban centers. Historically, as I mentioned, banks have not ventured much into rural areas of Peru due to high transaction costs and lower profit margins. And for this first stage, because the priority was to leverage the already existing networks, these networks were naturally focused around urban areas, which in practice means that Beam has not been able to venture yet a lot outside of the urban areas, and a lot of the rural areas which were a prime focus for this platform to be able to reach are still currently not being served. In order to try to remedy this aspect, the MFIs that were invited to participate and are now also a part of the Modelo Perú platform, unfortunately have struggled to start using the platform because of technical aspects related to how they needed to clear their accounting systems before being able to connect with the larger Beam platform. Next slide, please. Then the third challenge basically is around the lack of mobile network coverage. Even though Peru has 4 different mobile network operators that work very well on their own, mobile phone, it was reported to us on the interviews that mobile phone coverage in some areas continues to be sometimes problematic, even though most of the country has generally a good mobile coverage. But this issue came around between all 4 mobile network providers. The coverage around the country is good. However, in certain areas where Entel has good signal, for example, Movistar does not. And in other areas where Movistar has adequate network coverage, Claro does not. So it does become a key concern for agents working with Beam what mobile network operator they choose to operate their feature phone with that they're going to be using for the transactions of Beam. Because if they choose a network operator that doesn't have good coverage in the area where they are, then this will become an issue. And this indeed became an issue for some agents in some areas who turned out to have low connectivity and trying to connect a Beam transaction. Additionally, in a few regions, none of the three providers have adequate network coverage. From the three network operators that are currently operating with Beam, which is Claro, Movistar, and Entel. Next slide, please. And then here you can see basically a brief map on the coverage that these three mobile network operators have in the country. And as you can see, most of this coverage is again focused on the urban areas, which also speaks to the point that I had made earlier. Next slide, please. Finally, the most important challenge that Beam has faced is around the diverging perspectives on how to move forward. There are definitely diverging views among stakeholders on the best course of action as the platform moves forward. On one hand, large commercial banks are interested in prioritizing the volume of transactions and focus on strengthening one of the current services only, either P2P transactions or mobile phone top-ups, in order to first build the transactionality of the platform and increase the performance numbers first before thinking about continuing to strengthen the ecosystem and build the ecosystem. On the other hand, however, MFIs and credit unions that are part of Modelo Perú are more interested in continuing to develop the ecosystem in order to effectively reach poorly served remote locations, as was the original goal of the Beam platform, and moving on to the next planned phase of the project, which was the development of a function that will allow them to disperse and collect loans through Beam. Under the original plan, or under the original implementation plan of Beam, this was supposed to already happen yet. However, because of these diverging perspectives and the pressure from the large commercial banks, this is something that is being delayed currently. Next slide, please. Then for the proposed solutions in the works.
Well, let me just interrupt you, Pablo. We actually have a poll that we'd like to put up before going on to the next slide. So Pablo just named these different challenges that Beam is facing. What do you think is the most relevant to address in the short term, or rather the most critical for the success of Beam as it moves forward? Go ahead and list your response. Number one was the double work for banking agents and the fact that they're using perhaps two different devices and not charging their device that Beam is used on, and some of the challenges there in the agent network. The second is that the focus has remained on urban areas and banked populations, and we're opening poll here. So looks like 34% of you have voted. I'll keep reading through the options and give you some more time. The third challenge is the lack of mobile network coverage, the spotty coverage with the three mobile providers. And then the fourth is the diverging perspectives from all of the different stakeholders on whether to move forward or not. Just leave it here for another 10 seconds because about 70% of you have voted. All right, great. Well, thank you for making your selection, and we'll close the poll here. Pablo, take a look at these results. It looks like the lack of mobile network coverage is not something that our audience thinks is an immediate challenge, and perhaps that's because that's a solution to that would require a lot of long-term work. And then we're split between number one, this agent network issue, number two, the focus on urban areas and banked populations, and number three, the diverging perspectives on moving forward. So it doesn't look like there's sort of a clear immediate next step that rises to the fore as we move forward, and I think that's a significant challenge. So we'll go ahead and move on with the proposed solutions that you're about to talk about.
Yes, thank you. Next slide, please, then. The most interesting part about this is that PDP has been recalibrating its goals and also working very hard to address all the challenges that we discussed here. It is currently working on developing tailored solutions to address each issue that has emerged. Among other things, the initial pledge to reach 5 million unbanked clients that was made originally when the platform was first launched within the first 5 years has been revised to a more conservative goal of only reaching 2 million people. This was done after actually operating a year. It was decided that the initial pledge to reach 5 million people within the first 5 years was definitely not attainable. So it was now officially revised to 2 million. And then it was decided as part of the problem that I mentioned about diverging perspectives, that the main priority for PDP during this next year will be to create volume and scale in order to truly become a national payment system. And so they're definitely focusing on just strengthening first one of the different services that are available to the platform to increase transactionality before continuing the efforts to actually expand and continue building the ecosystem. So the solution that was pretty much developed for the first challenge that was mentioned was to further expand Beam outside the main cities. This is being done by leveraging the MFIs that are part of the Beam system. Currently, out of the 11 MFIs that are part of Pagos Digitales Peruano, that are part of the owners, the joint owners of Pagos Digitales Peruanos, huge efforts have been done to already launch the Beam platform with 6 of these MFIs. And the other 5 are expecting to be assigned during the next month. So hopefully during the next month, 11 of these MFIs can sign onto the platform. The work that these MFIs will do to sort of build Beam converter agent in rural regions of the country will be crucial towards expanding the use of the Beam platform outside the urban areas. The solution for the second challenge that we mentioned was merging Beam transactions into POS system for existing agent networks. So instead of making the agents operate both a POS system for their bank and a feature phone for all Beam transactions, a lot of work has been done on the back burner to sort of like incorporate the Beam transactions into the existing POS systems from the banks, so that agents are not required to have a second working capital and are not required to take an alternate training for learning to operate the Beam platform. This is something that has already been done for 2 of the largest banks in Peru, and hopefully there's also plans in the works in order to be able to do this for the other 2 as well, and for the other institutions that are part of the Beam network as well. And then for the last 2 challenges that were identified, the third solution for the mobile coverage issue is that Beam is currently in negotiations with Bitel, the 4th mobile network operator in Peru, so that they can also bring them on board and into the Beam platform, so that Bitel can also start so that Bitel users, Bitel cell phone clients can also start using the Beam platform. And this will be key because actually Bitel has good coverage in some of these regions that have been problematic for the other 3 operators. And then finally, for the 4th solution, PDP is working very hard on seeking further alliances with other commercial networks in order to promote digital payments and continue expanding the ecosystem.
Pablo, do you mind if we turn now to questions?
No, not at all.
I've been wanting to turn to questions for the last half hour, but also wanted to had this conflicting goal of wanting you to finish up your presentation, because there are some questions that have been coming in that you answered along the way, but others that I'd like to focus the time we have left on. So if we could go back to that slide on data. There are a few questions that have been coming in on the numbers. I'd like to mention that Jeffrey Bauer chimed in over the comments that there were over 100,000 transactions in February, which is a huge increase. So that's a good sign.
Yes, definitely, and that is one of the things that I mentioned. Because one of the new projects that PDP is working on is something that they call the Beamers, which is a sort of like coming up with a model for a light version of a banking agent. These are individuals that are able to perform cash in and cash out operations from their feature phones, and that are more light because they're not necessarily tied to a particular shop or to a particular pharmacy. This project apparently, I heard, has been very successful, and indeed, as I mentioned, the transaction numbers for the last month increased considerably, which is great news.
So let me turn to John Owens, if we could turn on his audio. John had some questions about the data and some clarifications that I think that some of the other commenters had as well. In particular, and while we're turning on his audio here, in particular, he wanted to know about frequency of use. So like, what's the active use in the last 90 days, 30 days, whatever. I know that the data we got was from PDP in Peru, not from GSMA, so it's not following the same standards of mobile money that we see elsewhere in terms of discussing active use, but perhaps you can speak to that. John, do we have you on the line? John, do we have you on the line here?
Yes, I think so. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, the question I had was on the definition of active users. Here it looks like you define an active user as somebody who's ready to conduct a transaction on BIM, meaning they've been registered. But the international standard normally used by AFI and GSMA would be somebody who's done, who's regularly doing transactions or at least a transaction in the last 90 days. So I'm curious, at least on a monthly basis, you've got daily average of transacting users on a daily basis within the month at 298 in January, 346 in December. I'm curious, does this mean that you would multiply that number by 30? Or I assume some of these people are transacting every week. So you probably can't combine them, but I'm curious in terms of how many within a month, how many individuals are actually transacting, not the number of transactions in a month, but the number of individuals on a monthly basis from the registered user base that are actually transacting. Do you have that information?
Thank you for your question, John. Yes, these are the numbers that were from our report that is developed by PDP every month, and these are the numbers that are included there. In terms of the number of accounts that are transacting every month, what I can tell you based on the information that we got from PDP is that at least up until January, around 5% of the accounts of the electronic wallets that are active on BIM were conducting at least one transaction. So even if you look at the number of accounts that were conducting transactions every month, the number was still very low. It was definitely better than if you look at daily average of transacting users, but it was around 5%. And then regarding your definition of your comment about the definition of what we consider to be active users versus dormant accounts, this was a definition that came directly from the PDP report. So that was not something that we had that was decided by us, but it was just copied from the way the PDP monthly report is structured.
And actually, we have a treat. There have been a lot of questions coming in, but I have to prioritize Miguel Arce from PDP. Arce. I'm sorry, Pablo. Miguel, can you hear us?
Yes, very well. Thanks for the chance.
Hola, Miguel. How are you?
How are you? I was hearing the question by John. And in that order, I have to tell that for us, for this spreadsheet, what we need to understand that for us, an active customer is just that customer that opens their BIN account and adds their PIN number. But for our business model, we understand and we try to pursue that an active customer will be those that achieve at least one transaction in the last 3 months. That's our perspective of an active customer. In terms of the percentage that already are using the platform of these customers, we increase this because the Beamer concept that we delivered in middle October last year. At that, these results are that, like you said, in February we have more than 100 transactions. In March, we are appointing to have 130 transactions, thousand. So the numbers of increase of these transactions are huge. With those new concept of Beamer, we impact monthly in monthly scenario almost 60,000 different clients, not necessarily Beamer's users, right now through the P2P or the top-ups. This is very interesting because our next step will be to invite these customers that receive the service from a Beamer in order that they can open their Beam by themselves.
Thanks so much, Miguel. We're going to leave you on the line and not turn you on mute again in case you want to chime in over the next few minutes that we have left. One of the questions that we received is on what the most frequent transaction was. I think you just said mobile top-ups and P2P were composed 60,000 of the transactions, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about frequency of transactions of different types.
Yeah, the more transaction use is the top-ups and the cash-ins in order to have enough e-money to do that, and then the P2P.
Okay, great. And Miguel, while I have you on the line, and feel free to not answer my question if it would be inappropriate for me to ask, but what do you see as the way forward as you think about the future of the model?
We have a plan around this Beamer concept that we prove in some pilots in different areas. So we are sharing this strategy with the banks. Almost 4 of them started 2 weeks ago. They own Beamer's experience. With those, we think we can achieve by July of this year to the 500,000 transactions per month. Our goal is to have 1 million transactions by the end of this year, because with this experience, we are moving from the top-ups to the P2P and to the other services, like we are going to introduce the access to pay some bills like water, light, etc. So this is a process of induction through the Beamers that for the adoption of the platform. No? We have a plan for that.
That's great, Miguel, and thanks to you for joining us, and thanks as well to PDP for all of their support and help as we went through the research process. I really appreciate it. Well, we've come to the end of our time. We have so many questions that we were unable to get to. I tried to get to the most frequently asked ones, but for those of you who asked questions during the webinar or asked for a follow-up of some sort, we're going to connect with you and make sure that we answer every single question and get to every piece of follow-up. As a reminder, in the handout section of the webinar, you can see the report. And you can follow us on at centerforfinancialinclusion.org, where you can also see the report there, and we'll be posting the webinar there as well. Thank you so much, Pablo, for presenting this brief and for undertaking this research. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and we look forward to the next time where we get to talk about what's happening in financial inclusion around the world. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thank you
day.
very much.